Now, the Education Secretary here, Bridget Phillipson, has said the government will step in more quickly to help struggling schools. That's based on the new Ofsted report cards that were revealed today. The new colour-coded report cards would have 1 or 2 word judgments across a range of categories, including quality of education, behaviour and leadership, giving, according to the government at least, a more nuanced view of the school's performance. Well, the old single-word judgments were scrapped last year after a coroner ruled that an Ofsted inspection had contributed to the death of primary school head teacher Ruth Perry. She took her own life in 2023 after Ofsted downgraded her school's rating to inadequate. In an interview with the BBC, the Education Secretary was asked about accusations that she was keeping the most dangerous parts of a system that contributed to Ruth Perry's death.
I know the family have been through a terrible ordeal, and what they have experienced has been a catalyst for change and reform across the system. This will make sure that there are a wider range of areas where we consider what a school is doing well or where there is need to improve. But alongside that, it's not just the report cards, it's the wider reform that is needed. There is more that we need to do, particularly around governance and transformation of Ofsted.
The head of Ofsted, Martin Oliver, said that parents didn't want the single word judgment, but they did want clarity about the school's performance. He added that the new report card, which is still subject to a consultation, would help to raise standards amongst pupils and reduce pressure on educational professionals. Well, Professor Julia Waters is Ruth Perry's sister. She's campaigned for changes to the Ofsted system. What does she make of that assessment?
I don't see the justification, sadly, for either of those claims. I fail to see how combining that with essentially a rehash of the old system, which is based on shame and punishment and these judgments, I fail to see how that can improve standards. And it essentially fails to address the key issue, which is considering the impact of the system on the well-being of teachers and school leaders.
But doesn't removing that overall single word judgment make a difference in terms of there not being that just one word that somebody might fixate on?
Well, now we have 5 words colour-coded to add to the insult. And as the Ofsted information explains, any individual one of those judgments could still have the kind of career-ending consequences, potentially, of the one overall effectiveness judgment, which we had before.
Would you accept, though, that the parents, who are also obviously part of all this, do want a degree of clarity and that there is a balance to be struck between the safeguarding aspects, the ways to improve standards for students, but also to give parents a degree of clarity about what school they are either sending their child to or what school their child is at?
Absolutely. We need clarity. These proposals seem to me to be trying to combine 2 irreconcilable things: greater detail, greater nuance, greater context with these headline judgments. Ofsted haven't addressed the key questions that needed to be addressed, the impact of their system on the well-being of head teachers and Ofsted's own accountability.
Bridget Phillipson, of course, says that this is all part of a broader reform of Ofsted. I mean, do you think Ofsted can be reformed in its current iteration, or, as some unions have suggested, does it need to go?
I stood up at the NEU conference last year and opposed NEU's argument that Ofsted ought to be abolished. I said that what was needed was radical reform. Well, this was Ofsted's chance to reform itself, and I think it's proven that it can't reform itself and shouldn't be allowed to reform itself. And frankly, if this consultation is, as Bridget Phillipson has assured me, a genuine consultation, I think now is the time for the teachers out there, everybody, parents, school children, everybody affected by education and by the inspection system, to teach Ofsted a lesson.
So it can be reformed, but it needs to come from the government?
I think it needs to be reformed, not to be allowed to reform itself.
Given the awful circumstances which have led you to be so involved in this particular issue, do you feel let down by the government, by what has happened up until today?
I do. It's been a 2-year battle. The inquest found that an Ofsted inspection had contributed to my sister's death. Then there was a parliamentary inquiry which vindicated our findings about many of the flaws within the system, the undue impact on the well-being of head teachers and teachers. And now we have these proposals for a new system, and when the consultation is launched, there's no mention of Ruth. No mention of the Prevention of Future Deaths report or the inquest. No mention of the independent learning review that Ofsted themselves commissioned. Instead, they framed it as a response to their own big listen. It feels like having made progress, we've taken a massive step back here in this failure of Ofsted to acknowledge the context and the failings that have led them to be in the public eye in the way they are, to need to reform.
Clearly, you're doing this in memory of your sister to make sure that the circumstances of her death are known as widely as possible and to prevent others from meeting death in the same way. I mean, as things stand now, are head teachers in any more secure, safe position than they were when your sister took her own life?
They are, to the extent that they know they're not alone, that they feel more empowered to speak out and to seek help, that they realise that there is a problem with the school accountability system, that it's not their fault. But in terms of having confidence in Ofsted to listen to their complaints, to have confidence in Ofsted to prevent it happening again, no, I don't.
I detect there's real frustration, but a fair amount of anger on your part.
Yeah, anger, frustration. But the problem is when you use a word like anger, it can be used against you. Some of the things that I have said over the last couple of years have been sort of twisted into, obviously we have a distressed family here. We have an angry family, as if that diminishes the legitimate concerns we have and undermines the things that we're saying about institutions that need to change.
Professor Julia Waters, the sister of Ruth Perry.